Okay, welcome to part 3 of our series on how to maintain the university websites using Cascade. In this portion, we're going to look at the basics of how to edit things in Cascade. And there's enough detail here that we're just going to look at the very basic process options. And then later in a different video, we will get to the different custom page elements that we've programmed into Cascade for our particular design. But this one is just going to be the editing basics. Alright, so if I can bring up a browser, you're going to see again the dashboard view in Cascade, which is the first thing you see when you've logged in. Let me bring up my notes. And again, previous videos have showed you how to navigate around and find the assets in Cascade that you want to work with. Cascade lets you edit the content on our web pages, and it lets you update files such as images or PDFs. To edit an asset, bear in mind that your Cascade account needs to be enabled to access and edit that asset. For instance, most pages you will not have the ability to edit. You should typically just have the ability to edit pages and files in your specific area that you're in charge of. Also, I'll bring up a page just to look at while we talk. Remember that the page design elements that are common across the websites, meaning, for instance, this header of the pages, this pop-out menu, elements like the footer, that are common across the board, these are automatically added to every page. So you will not see these aspects of the page when you're editing. You're only going to be dealing with the content within the page between the header and the footer. So the job, I covered that. So to begin editing, you can either navigate to the page like we've done here, and then up towards the top, you'll see the edit button. And a quicker way to do it is, say you're anywhere, whether you're looking in the sitemap or the My Content view, or anywhere you can find a link to an asset in Cascade. If you right click on it, again, if you have access to edit that asset, the drop down menu will give you an edit option, which is I'm going to click right here, and then that's going to bring us straight to the edit view of the page we're just looking at. I'm going to close this out just to show you once more before we edit it the page that we're going to be working with. Okay, so here's a very simple page, the Cascade 8 training page, title here. And I'm going to use the edit button at the top of the page, and you'll see that we were looking at a form here. It doesn't look like the page as it lays out when it's finished, but it does give you access to the content. Older Cascade users who are familiar with previous versions will see a major visual difference here. I think you'll find, though, once you work with it a little bit, that it's pretty much the same operation as with the old Cascade. It's just laid out in a less cramped, kind of more up-to-date, modern visual style. Now let's look at this highlighted box here towards the top. It says, a draft of this page was saved today at 2:59 p.m. Do you want to preview the changes, resume editing, or discard it? We're going to talk a lot more about drafts in Cascade 8 because they're a lot more prominent than they were previously. It is an improvement, but it is a different workflow, and we'll look at it in more detail very soon in this video. But for right now, I'm just going to discard the previous draft, and it's going to warn me again, are you sure you want to discard your draft? The draft is edits that I made that I didn't commit, but we'll get more into it in a little bit. So I'm just going to OK on the canceling of the draft. So here's the edit view. First thing I'd like to point out is if you want to give yourself a little more room to edit, there's a full screen option up the top. If you click that, it just gives you the full width of your browser window. And then for right now, I'll just undo that. And we'll see the display name and the title for the page first. If you're familiar with our Cascade pages in the past, the display name is what's going to show up in navigation menus primarily for this page, and then the title is what's going to show up at the top of your page under the header, and that should be the full, although concise as possible, title of your page, but you have more room to give a fuller title in the title field. Most these display and navigation, display share buttons, and display and sitemap, you can leave those as they are. We won't get into those. Ordinary page here tells you that this is the kind of page structure that this page has. And then it starts to break down the elements of the page. I'm just going to make a very simple edit to the title right now because, again, later on in a different video we're going to get into the specific options you have for components to your page, but I just want to show you the edit process right now. Oh, by the way, if you're looking at an asset and you do not have an edit option, for instance, edit is not listed in the drop-down menu when you right-click on a link, or you don't have an edit button when you're looking at a page, there's a couple reasons for that. One is, again, you might not have access to edit that page. Another is that someone may have checked out or locked that page to work on it. And that's something we'll cover later in this video. So there's a couple reasons you might not see an edit option. All right, so I'm just going to make a very simple edit to the title of this page. I'm just going to take off this extraneous text in the title. So we're going to just take out 3 of the 6 words here. That's it. And now, here's the process for when you've made edits to a page. After you've made the changes you want, you may notice up here that just in the background, Cascade is constantly saving of drafts so that you don't lose any work in case you lose power or something. But that's not something you need to think about. What you do need to do is then start to look at your edits by previewing the draft. Older versions worked different. Older versions of Cascade, but in Cascade 8, the step you take after making your edits is you click the preview draft button, and then Cascade will give you a little notification that your draft is saved. Remember, we're talking about the draft of the page. We have not yet committed a new version of this page. We're just working in the draft now. And you'll see that in 2 different places up at the top. There's a little drop-down menu that's appeared here that says you're now looking at the draft page, or excuse me, the draft version. And over here, there's a little sentence that says, "This is a draft. Click Submit to save changes." So here you can submit the draft. You'll see that our title here has changed. It's just the 3 words. I took out the other 3. Oops, sorry. I just clicked off to the wrong page. I'm going to use my back button to get back to it. So again, I left the page by accident. I came back to it, and it still has the draft indicator here and over here, and there's now highlighted a submit button above the page. So the next step then is to submit your changes. Now, excuse me, Cascade in this case has auto-generated some comments on what change was made. And when you make a simple change, like just changing a few words in the title, the auto-generated comments are usually pretty good. The comment says, updated the title from the old title to Cascade 8 training. And so now, if this didn't say anything that was useful, please take the time to fill in some comments here that will help you understand or other people understand in the future what you did on this version of this page. That helps us a lot when we're trying to troubleshoot something, or if multiple people are working on a page, you can find out who did what. If you need to revert back some versions, you can see which versions had what changes. So really take the time to make a meaningful comment here. And then we recommend that you click the Check Content and Submit button. The Check Content and Submit button performs 3 checks on your page. One is a spell check. Congratulations, no misspelled words were found. There's also a link check. Congratulations, no broken links were found. And a basic accessibility check, which checks for certain things to make sure that people who might be using screen readers for visually disabled users or something like that, that some basic things have been handled. And in this case, all the checks are passed. So we can click this big check mark button to finish. Only now have we committed a new version of this page to Cascade. Again, so you can work in drafts for quite a while until you actually submit a draft as a new version of the page. So now you'll notice the draft indicators have disappeared. We are now looking at the current version of this page with my new title. You'll recall from earlier videos that these changes now only exist in Cascade because we have not yet published the changes. I'll show you really quick. That's as simple as clicking the Publish button and then clicking Publish again. You can look at the Publish settings. They probably won't mean anything to you, so there's really no reason to. So just click Publish, and it will say that the page was sent to the Publish queue to get published as soon as it can do it. There's one important thing I want to point out when you're editing a page, particularly when you have copied some content from, say, a Word document or a web page or some other source that you want to paste into your page. We very commonly see this happen where someone will go to edit a page, and in this case I'll scroll down to a content section that accepts a little more text. Here's one here. And while I'm at it, this is called a WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get, editing field, also called a rich text field. This is where probably most of your content is going to be typed into. This has its own full screen option, and clicking that will give you a lot more space to work with and clear out a lot of extraneous background stuff that might be distracting. So I'm going to leave it here right now, and I'm going to, off screen, I'm going to go to a online document that I'm going to copy some text out of. So I've highlighted some text. You're not seeing this on screen, but I've copied some text, and now I want to paste it into here. I'm going to hit enter, and then I'm going to hit the paste function, and it looks fine. Problem is, if I actually look at all of the code that was pasted in along with this displayed text, which I can see by clicking the source code button, you'll see that there's all kinds of nasty, unneeded code that can actually really mess things up down the road. So we don't want any of this stuff. That's just extraneous code that was copied over from another program, whether it's a Word on your desktop or a website. We don't want that. So I'm going to use the undo button to undo that paste. How do I get that content in this page without all that mess? Well, fortunately on this edit drop-down menu, there's a paste as text option. And you click that, and it'll tell you paste is now in plain text mode. Contents will now be pasted as plain text until you toggle this option off. So it will stay on, at least for a given editing session, until you turn it off. I'm going to dismiss that notification. Now I'm going to return and just get back to that new line, and I'm going to hit the same Control V function. It looks almost the same, but the source code is then nice and clean. We just have a little extraneous space character, but that doesn't hurt anything. But all that other stuff is gone, and we've got nice clean text just contained in a P paragraph element. That's exactly what you want. So don't forget to use that paste as text option whenever you're pasting in from other programs or websites or whatever it happens to be. Now we're going to return to the PowerPoint. I'll just shrink this back down and save this change real quick. Preview draft. We wait for the page to render. By the way, we know these pages take a long time to render sometimes. We are working on a project to reduce that quite a bit. But what's happening during that delay is that Cascade is indexing lots of elements throughout the website and compiling all the headers and different aspects and the navigation elements. And that's what's taking time before it actually displays the page to you. Okay, I'm going to submit this draft. You'll see here's an example where the comment is not very helpful. I'm just going to say, added such and such information. You would want to be more specific when you do this so people know what you actually added. Added information to the first content section. Okay. Check content and submit. Green check, green check, green check. All those are good. So I can finalize that submission. And the changes have been saved to the system. We don't need to bother publishing it right now, but that would be typically the next step. Okay, I'm going to bring up the PowerPoint again. We're going to talk about cross-editing. Cross-editing is when more than one person edits the same asset at the same time. For instance, let's say Annabelle is editing a page in Cascade, and her draft has been saved. As you know, Cascade just automatically saves a draft every so many seconds to conserve her work before she even submits anything. Let's say a different user, Beauregard, is also interested in working on this page, and he begins editing the same page. It's key to know that Beauregard is not prevented from editing the page, even though Annabelle is already editing it. He will, however, see a page like what you see here. It'll notify him that Annabelle is currently editing a draft of this asset. And then Cascade suggests you mention them in a comment to discuss potential changes. We haven't used that much. That comment would only kind of show up when Annabelle looks at her Cascade dashboard, as far as I know. You'd be better off to contact them by phone or some other means that's more time sensitive to make sure you don't screw each other up. The key to understand is that even though he sees this message, he is entirely able to overwrite Annabelle's changes, whether she knows it or wants it or not. So let's say Annabelle submits her changes on the page, and then Beauregard also submits their changes. He will get a message at this point that says to Beauregard, submitting your draft will overwrite the more recent changes made by Annabelle. Annabelle updated the current version, and it'll say the time and date. Nonetheless, all Beauregard has to do is click OK, and his changes are going to cancel out whatever Annabelle did and replace them with his own. So this has happened before. It's a real drag. If there's any risk that someone else might be working on the same page as you, coordinate with them in person, by phone, or arrange somehow to try and avoid that. But there is a Cascade-centric version of preventing this cross-editing scenario from happening. That's called checking out or locking an asset. We'll go back to Cascade in a moment and look at this. But basically what happens is you have the option, if you're able to edit a page, that you can check out that asset. When you do that, Cascade makes a working copy of the asset, which is kind of analogous to a draft. And the current copy, which I guess I should explain, the current copy is the last fully submitted version of a page. It's the one that when you publish that asset, the current version is the one that gets published. Drafts and working copies don't get published. Only the current version will get published. So after you submit something, that becomes the current version. The current version is the last submitted version of a page or a file. So when you check out or lock an asset, Cascade makes a working copy, and then the current copy is locked until you either commit the working copy changes, meaning you submit the changes you make to the working copy, or you can also just break the lock, in which case you will lose any changes that were made on the working copy. You can also reassign the lock to another user if they have permission to modify the asset. So say you checked out an asset, you didn't finish what you wanted to do to it, and you're going on vacation, but you don't want to risk anyone else coming in to make any other changes to it. You could reassign the lock to another Cascade user who had permission to edit that page, and they can pick up where you left off. Also, when you check out an asset, bear in mind that someone like myself or a high-level Cascade administrator type user could break the lock. And sometimes that's needed to kind of handle a situation where things have gotten messed up. When you have checked out or locked an asset, you'll notice that the current copy no longer has an edit button, and you have to switch to the current copy to make any changes on that asset. Also, the locked assets will appear in your My Content view that we looked at previously. We'll look at all this in a moment. And instead of draft, Cascade refers to the working copy of a locked asset in the same way that a draft works. Real quick, we'll go back to Cascade to look at locking or checking out an asset. So let's say I'm not sure that another user isn't going to come in and try and edit this page while I'm trying to edit it. So what you do is you go to the More menu up in the upper right, and you'll see a Checkout Lock option. Click that. Down at the bottom it tells you Asset Successfully Checked Out. Again, similar to where it said a draft indicator when you're working on a draft, this now shows you that you're working on a working copy. And it says over here that this page has been locked today since time. You are the lock owner. And right there is a link in case you wanted to reassign this lock to another user. So now I'm looking at the working copy, and so you'll notice up here I have a few different options. I can edit the working copy, I can break the lock, or I can commit changes. When you're working on a working copy, they kind of change the terminology to commit instead of submit. We'll look at those terms in a little bit. But notice if I happen to be looking at the current version of this page, it still tells me that this page is locked. It still tells me that which version I'm looking at, which is the current version. But you'll notice the edit link is gone. And the break lock link is gone. So this is where I told you earlier that if you don't see an edit option, it could be that the page is locked, which you're shown right here. So you can switch over here with the drop down to the working copy, and then there is your edit copy there. Or excuse me, your edit option comes back up. I'll click that, and I'll just add a word here. And again, preview draft. You'll notice instead of saying draft saved, it says working copy saved. But then the button still says preview draft anyhow. The process is pretty much the same. It tells you your working copy is saved. Click commit changes to save your changes to the current version. So that's exactly what we'll do. Commit changes. Once again, we're looking at the delay in Cascade rendering the page. Okay. Commit changes. Same thing. The comment there is good. Shows me that I updated the title from this to that. Check the content and submit. All the checks are good. Click the check mark. Your changes have been saved to the system. Would you like to publish them? So there's a link to publish down at the bottom, and of course your publish button is usually at the top as well. So that's how you check out, aka lock an asset and work on the working copy. And then it's very similar to when you're working on a draft without checking out a asset. And I'll just show you some different terminology real quick between the two modes. When you're working on a draft, the button will say submit. When you're working on a working copy, the button will say commit changes. You can discard drafts. You can also, on a working copy, you can break the lock. The draft will have an edit button. On a working copy, there is no edit option when you're viewing the current version, and you have to switch to the working copy to get that edit option. In both cases, the button will say preview draft when you want to start to save your changes. One thing I found in testing is that, and I'll go back to this in Cascade to show you, if you are looking at this edit overlay here, you'll notice there's a close option here. The problem with the close button is sometimes you can make changes and click close, and the page beneath will not show you that you now have a draft or a working copy working. For instance, you know, before where you had an indicator over here that said either draft or current or working copy, sometimes you can make changes. I'll show you. I click edit. I'm going to remove this word locked. Over here, this is going to indicate to me that a draft was saved. But instead of previewing the draft, let's say I just close this. Now there's a draft saved. I just hit close. There's nothing here that indicates to me that there is a draft or that I can switch to a draft. But I can kind of work around this bug if I reload the page using the browser's reload function. And then here, I now have this drop down back again that will let me switch between the current version and the draft version. So I can go back to the draft and pick up editing the draft or submit the draft like normal. So that might be confusing. The bottom line is avoid, in any case, using this close button. Just go through the process of previewing the draft. You'll be better off. All right, let's see what's next. Okay, editing files. So this whole time we have been looking at, I am just going to go away from this page because I don't want to submit any edits. We've been looking at pages. Again, this icon here with a little turn down corner indicates a page which corresponds to a web page. When you go to edit a page, you get a form that shows all the content components of that page where you add text and images and stuff like that. What if you want to change a file, such as an image file or a PDF? Let's look at that. Here's an image file called Scholarships Annual JPEG. And similar, you'll see an edit option here. Typically with files, you're going to have a new version of that file or a modified version of that file like on your computer that you want to replace here. Just for your information, if I could click edit on a image, there are some in Cascade edits you can make, like rotating it, flipping it. You can even crop it or resize it. I can't tell you, in fact I will tell you that Cascade does not necessarily do the most beautiful resizing. That's something you probably want to use a dedicated software package for, like GIMP or Photoshop. Anyhow, so when you are looking at a file, you can then bring in the new version of the file either by dragging and dropping it to this region here with the dotted line, or if you click here, you will see the file chooser from your browser. There is one thing I want to mention here about working with files. It's pretty important because we see a lot of times when people have a file, particularly a PDF, that they need to update every year. For instance, let's say they have some kind of printable form that they want to provide on their website that needs to be a PDF, and each year they need to kind of go in the document and update the dates, maybe due dates or whatever, contact people or whatever, and then they upload a new version of the file for every year. And so what they end up with is a version of the same file every year. They'll have Scholarships 2019, Scholarships 2020, Scholarships 2018, all the way back. Unless you need to, for some reason, keep multiple past versions of a file, which is usually not the case, if those need to be online on the website, which again is usually not the case, that's the only time you would have those multiple versions of the file. The much better way to do it is to have your file have a non-dated name. For instance, Scholarships Annual. There's no 2019, no 2016 on here. It's just for some reason they need to annually update this image. Say this was your PDF. We'll just use an image to make it easier. Keep a generic evergreen system name. And every year, just edit that file with the new version. Replace the old version from last year with the new version, and then publish the new version. Rest assured that all the past versions of that file will be retained in Cascade if for some reason you need to go back to them. And so you don't need to keep them on the website unless there's some special reason to do that. Cascade will keep all the past versions. Let's see if I go to the More menu here. I think this image, oh, sorry, this is the initial version, but you'll see, for instance, on our training page, if I go to the More menu and click Versions, it will show many past versions, and I can go back to them, each of them. We'll cover versions more in a later video, but my point is here, if you've got something that you update every year, just update it by editing the existing version and leave the date off the system name. In this case, we want to update this image to 2020. So off on my computer off screen, I've created a 2020 version of this image. I clicked edit on the image, and I'm just going to drag in from my desktop a new version of this image that I've created. Bing, it immediately updates. And then again, preview draft. The draft is saved. I'm going to submit it. Here I'm going to say in the comment field, updated image with 2020 year. It's kind of, there's no misspellings found in the image, which is good. Not that it would find any because it's an image, but and then I submit it. Now again, I didn't have to change any of my links to this file. I don't have a bunch of different files with different years on the system name. I just have a single file. I publish it, and that's all I have to do. The last thing we're going to cover is just a few troubleshooting points. Once again, as I mentioned before, if you're looking for an asset and you can't find it, maybe you've even used the Cascade search option and tried to type in part of the system name and you just can't find it, maybe you're on the wrong site in Cascade. And review previous videos if you don't know how to make sure you're on the right site. If you don't see an edit button on an asset, it could be that you just don't have access to edit that asset. And in which case, you can contact us in marketing and communications and we can help you. Or someone may have checked out that asset and you might see an indication for that on the page. And if you see no publish button, there's a few different ways that few different reasons why that might be happening. If you're looking at a draft, remember a draft must be submitted before you can publish it. If you are looking at a working copy, similarly, the working copy must be committed before you publish it. And if you're looking at a past version, you must set that version as the current version. In other words, you must restore it as the current version before you can publish a version. So those are just some things you might run into. All right, those are the basics of editing, and we did touch on publishing too. Hopefully it made sense, and hopefully that cross-editing scenario doesn't happen to you, and you know of ways to avoid it, including checking out assets and how that all works. So look forward to future videos where we'll get into the actual parts of the pages that you can use in our custom layout options, and you will be well on your way to maintaining your web pages for the university.